Hello everyone, and welcome to Museum Computer Group's MCG's 2024 conference. Who is this for, and why should they care? My name's Georgina Brooke, and this is my first year as chair of the committee, and my 8th year being part of the MCG committee. When I'm not doing this, I work for a company called One Further as a senior content strategist. I think I'd first like to apply the conference title, Who is this for, and why should they care, to the subject of the MCG itself. Who are we, and why should you care? The MCG has been running since 1982. Now, I think that's pretty incredible in digital terms. It's older than me and pretty much every digital touchpoint that I know how to use. But I think that speaks to an ongoing community of practice of technologists working in museums, collaborating on answers to shared problems. Throughout that time, so coming into our 43rd year, the MCG has always been volunteer-run and not-for-profit, sustained by the interest and energy of its participants and committee. There are two main things we organise, this conference once a year and a discussion list hosted for JISC, which is free to sign up. The discussion list is, I think, one of the most useful things I've discovered as part of my professional development in the sector. People use the discussion list in lots of different ways, to get advice on software, to connect with someone who's tackled a similar problem to them, to organise subgroups related to particular special interests. Ed on the committee compares it to ChatGPT, but with human intelligence. It's a brilliant source of collective wisdom available to anyone for free across the sector. Earlier in the year, I wanted to write an article on video games in the cultural sector, a topic I know nothing about. And I received over 77 emails, and 77 very helpful emails from the MCG list, from which I had a smaller number of follow-up conversations and Zoom meetings. This collectively allowed me to write an article citing case studies and quoting individuals who had worked with video games for much of their life. It's a supportive mix of agencies and culture sector folk all sharing their time and knowledge for the community's benefit. So if you Google MCG discussion list, you should be able to find it. One thing you might not be aware of is that the MCG is a membership organisation. But the only criteria for membership is that you sign up for free to be part of this discussion list. So if you're not already a member, please do consider joining and being part of what makes this community special. A steady stream of knowledge and expertise spread across different job roles that exist in the Museums+Tech overlap. And in an age where almost all our digital transactions are mediated by for-profit algorithms, ultimately serving a handful of billionaires, MCG feels like a vestige of what the internet might have been. Collaborative, free, open, and democratic. As well as the discussion list, MCG runs this conference once a year, and that's all organised by volunteers and also not-for-profit. So pulling off a conference for 180 people doesn't happen by accident, and it's not something that I want to take for granted. We're all feeling busier and busier year on year, so carving out the time to run, promote, and devise a conference on a volunteer basis is no mean feat. So I'd like to thank the people that made that possible. Firstly, our brilliant band of volunteers and our speakers. I'd also like to thank our sponsors and corporate members. As I said at the start, we're not-for-profit, and our biggest outlay is this annual conference, the catering and the drinks. So all the sponsorship money that we get helps us subsidise the cost of the ticket and allow us to put on what is one of the most affordable conferences in the sector. And I think still offering something quite different in terms of the wider community that supports it. This is the first year in 8 years that we've held the venue outside of London, and the first time ever, I think, that we've sold out. So thank you also to Birmingham Museums Trust, and in particular, Zach Menser's support of the MCG. So if you could join me in thanking our volunteers for putting in the time and our sponsors for this year's conference, National Lottery Heritage Fund, Numico and Manifesto, and our corporate members for this year. Accessible by Design, Amgedfa Cymru Museum Wales, Ben Uri, Capture, Collections Trust, One Further, Science Museum Group, Substract, System Simulation, Untitled, V&A, and the Wellcome Collection. Thank you. So, the title of our conference, Who is this for and why should they care? There's a couple of different questions under here that we'll be exploring today. It's relatively easy to create content for our peers, but when your potential audience is the globally connected internet population, how do you start? How do you make meaningful online experiences for an audience you've never met? The traditional stereotype around arts funding for digital is that it will fund something short-term and visible like an app. But how is that changing, and how can we build audience-first evaluation into what gets funded? In some ways, digital evaluation is easy. We open our analytics dashboard and instantly we have more stats available than it's possible to get from months of in-person reporting. But the availability of digital data is part of the problem and doesn't always help tell us who we're serving and whether they care. I'm really pleased to welcome our two keynotes today, Rich Prowse from Content Design London and Josie Fraser from National Lottery Heritage Fund. They'll both be tackling these questions from very different angles. I really like the idea for this topic of audiences to have both a sector keynote, that's Josie, and an outside the sector keynote, that's Rich. Rich will be talking first, and he's Director of Practice at Content Design London. I wanted to work with Content Design London on this topic of user-first design thinking, because I think they've really led the field when it comes to digital content, which is my personal specialism. My very first job was working for a large multinational agency, project managing web builds, and one of my very first clients was the Government Digital Service and Sarah Winters, who now heads up Content Design London. I distinctly remember the sea change she introduced in government departments, moving them away from a disjointed set of services under DirectGov and into the user-focused gov.uk that we have today. It's been 10 years since I worked on that project, but there's a lot of the principles of content design that I think we in the sector are still absorbing. In principle, we like the idea of user-first planning, but the methods and tools and the professional practice of making that happen aren't exactly taught on the job. So that's what Rich is going to give us an overview of next. So if you could join me in welcoming Rich Prowse to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to get myself set up for a second. Right, I've got a clicker. Let's see how this goes for us. Cool. Right. So, good morning. It is lovely to be here. And first of all, thank you to Georgina and the Museums Computer Group for inviting me to speak. And everybody here in person who's been able to make it. Trains, I hear, are disrupted, and also online this morning. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about humanising the digital experience using content design. Content design offers us, you, powerful tools to deepen audience connections. And today we're going to explore how this approach can transform visitor experiences, increase engagement, and broaden audiences for you. I know that some of you will already be doing this work in your organisations, but this may be new to some people. So we're going to go through the general principles of content design and how it works, and hopefully kind of reveal like the process that will help you achieve the goals of humanising your digital content. Thank you. Didn't want to be too close. Cool. So, who am I? As Georgina says, I am Rich Prowse. I'm the Director of Practice at Content Design London. I work closely with Sarah Winters and the team. What does Director of Practice mean? In reality, my job is to work with the designers at Content Design London and also the wider community of practice, whether that be here or in government or in the private sector, to apply the principles of content design. And just so you know, my background actually started out in higher education, so I'm familiar with working in large organisations in the public sector, and also those those institutions which take time to change, and often where you don't have a lot of resource to do the thing that you need to do. Since joining Content Design London, I have had the immense opportunity to work with organisations around the world and help many organisations to help them transform their user experience. Just so everybody feels okay, most of the problems that we encounter both in the public and private sector are the same. The content problems that these organisations have, whether you are working in the cultural sector or you're working in the private sector, are often very similar. They're just slightly different takes on it each time. So, as Georgina said, Sarah Winters and her team founded the principles of content design at gov.uk. It's probably something you have interacted with every single day in one way or another, or you have come to look at it when you need to find out when a bank holiday is. You may have applied for a passport. It really did transform the way that citizens accessed information, democratising it and making it easier to do things online. Since then, Sarah and her team, including me, have kind of worked with organisations across the world, not-for-profits, and we've helped organisations to achieve their strategic goals and aims through content design. So the question is, why is content important? It's a question that I don't think we've actually fully answered, as an organisation. And what I mean by that is we continue to see that organisations don't really understand the value of the thing that they have. If we took away content, then there would be no interaction. It wouldn't be possible for someone to do a thing. And content touches every aspect of what people do, whether that's their first interaction or their physical visits. So your content needs to work across both physical and digital. And when content design succeeds, the entire experience can feel natural and seamless, almost to the point where you don't know it's there. But I suspect all of you have had the experience where the content does not work. And it is really difficult to do the thing. And actually, that might even discourage you from doing it. Ask me about UPS later. Yeah, I was having trouble with their website last night. So what are content designers? There is a mistake to believe that content design is just about writing. It's a very small part of what content designers actually do. They often find allies in service designers and UX designers, but fundamentally, I always talk about content designers as sense makers. We work across all types of content. You can find us in marketing, you can find us in technical information, but our job really is to truly understand how people behave, what they genuinely need, and through this process of sense making, we can develop real empathy for our audiences. And when we understand basically how people interact with content or cultural organisations like yours, we can create more welcoming experiences and more meaningful experiences for everyone. So I was on the train and I was looking at this article, which is from the Arts Professional. What it was talking about is basically the idea for a kind of national collection organisation for basically cultural collections, a unified digital platform. And what was really interesting about that is often we think about this as a dev problem or a digital problem that requires developers and requires UX designers. I actually think it actually needs content people. They have the appreciation of the knowledge that's contained within these collections, how it's existing, how it's organised at the present, and how it might be organised in the future. Without content people, without people who can organise information, understand journeys, it's going to be very difficult to do that. So if you're a content person, you are valuable, you are important, and your role will become only increasingly important if you want to open up information, allow people to access information in a way that makes sense to them. And that could be the public, but it could be the curators or the people looking after that information who need to enter it in the back end of the system. They are all users, and sense makers are really important to make sure that that project, if it ever happens, is a success. So what is content design? Well, Sarah Winters puts it best. It's the right content at the right time in the right way. And if you've ever met Sarah, that's literally how she will speak. She's direct, to the point, and she basically speaks a lot of sense. If you don't deliver the content in the right way to your audience, at the right time, and in the right way, the format that they need, it will never work. And that's what content design is about. It's about doing this thing, making sure that we join up these experiences, this content, to make sense for people. So how do we think about content design? Well, there's lots of ways to think about content design. There are lots of basic lenses we can think about content design. Some people look at it from the perspective of writing. Some people look at it, like myself, from the perspective of design. And underneath content design is actually a series of techniques and processes and methods. Content design as a practice is made up really fundamentally of three parts. Design thinking, which some of you may be familiar with, which is user-focused, iterative, and evidence-based. We tend to use the double diamond, which we'll come on to later, which is the method. That's how we understand and make sense. And then we have the techniques as content designers that we use, which are user research, user stories, user journeys, pair writing, content crits, to name a few. These are based on practice that has developed over time, not only in government, but also throughout different sectors, bringing it to a point where it's something that you can apply regardless of whether you're working on something information-based or maybe you are responsible for more kind of e-commerce aspects. But the fundamental thing here is it's a systematic approach which you can stand alone or can be integrated into existing marketing and communication efforts. So, how do we give users the right content at the right time in the right way? Well, first of all, we need to understand the challenge. What we tend to find in organizations is they go to the other end first, which is the solution. It's just, can you put this on the website? Or can you just do this thing? Often what we tend to find is that basically the solution isn't, the problem isn't the one that the organization perceives. And the solution they think is not the one that they actually need. So through a process of discovery, we basically understand the challenge. And then we naturally narrow it down. We define the problem. And by doing so, we can basically sense make what's going on. And once you've agreed on what the problem is, you can prioritize it. You've probably all been in a situation where everything needs fixing or everything is on fire. But how do you decide what needs firefighting first? Well, this gives you a way to do it because it allows you to identify those pain points and opportunities in a much more easy to understand and identifiable way. Then you develop, so you create potential solutions, test them, and identify what works. Humans are squishy. That's another phrase that Sarah uses. They don't do what you expect that they're going to do, and they always are quite surprising when they do the things that they do. And then only then do we actually deliver for a solution that will actually work. And what's the point here is this is not about making guesses. This is about making informed decisions. But that doesn't mean that doesn't call on individual expertise. It's not replacing individuals or anything like that. It's synthesizing the best things about people and also a systematic process. Now, if you've ever worked in design, you know it rarely follows a straight line. But the path from discovery to delivery is squiggly. And what matters is how you navigate this space. I always say trust the process. And what I mean by that is if you can follow this process, you will get out the other side and you will get what you need. But you have to have faith in it. And this is the design-led approach. The idea is it just constantly pulls you back to your audience. Because what happens often when we're building a thing or we're designing a thing or writing a thing is we kind of move away from the people we're writing it for. And it gets caught up in the politics, it gets caught up in people's opinion. This process pulls us back continually to the user, asking, what is the need? Why are we doing this thing? And working in this way can help teams focus on the right problems, break down projects which are often very complex in the digital space into manageable chunks. And that's really important if you're managing large projects where risk is really important to manage. It allows you to make decisions at iterative stages, so you're constantly adjusting for what you're learning. And it helps you to constantly adapt as you learn. So how does content design work in practice? Starts with research, unsurprisingly. Knowledge powers content design. In fact, it powers all of human-centered design. And by actually understanding people's behavior, we can create digital services, apps, websites, content that can amplify and enhance physical experiences, digital experiences, and strengthen the connection between visitor and institution. And through careful research, we can learn how to make physical and digital touch points work harder and welcome more people. So, during the research phase, which is this one here, I'm quite liking my graphics today. They caused me a bit of problem earlier on. I wasn't anticipating them to work. Basically, you understand user behavior, so how people process information. Here's the thing. We don't process information like we like to think we do. Humans are emotional. They're subject to biases. And they make, basically, how they feel can affect the decisions that they make. Also, we understand natural language patterns, which are really important for creating content that can be read and understood by people. And we also understand how they behave. So people have mental models, how things work. Has anybody encountered a door where they pulled it towards them with a handle and it's not been a door that opens in that way? Yeah? That's actually got a famous name. It's called a Norman door. Basically, you're pulling the door towards you because a handle indicates pull towards me, but it doesn't actually work. That's a mental model. That's how you think door handles work. They really annoy me. It's my pet hate. User journey. We also understand user journeys, navigation preferences, so how people like to navigate and find things, how they interact with touch points, fancy name for channels, and the decision-making moments that they take. We also like to find out the pain points, so obstacles they face. You'll find that often organizations will put lots of obstacles unintentionally in the way of the user. They don't see them because they are not users themselves. Their unmet needs and where things go wrong. And they do go wrong, but your job as a content designer is to unpick that and understand how you can fix that problem. So, as a content designer, you have a range of research methods available to you. These have a long history. A lot of them are actually cited in basically academia, from anthropology, sociology, psychology. They have a foundation. They are not something that has been made up. I'd encourage you to learn about the origins of human-centered design and where it comes from and what was learnt by organizations in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. There was actually a lot of thinking about basically how humans think and work that basically helped kind of create foundations for human-centered design today. So as a content designer, you have the following methods that you're probably going to call on the most, but there are other methods that you can and will use depending upon the project. So there's keyword research and social listening. It's all out there. Users are generating huge amounts of information for you that's publicly accessible. They search, they used to tweet. They might go on Reddit, but they are constantly providing information for organizations. And these are really important because we can understand how people speak, the language that they actually use to search and find things. If you can't use their language, they can't find you. Good example of that is, anybody ever had a bike that broke and they didn't know the name of the thing? Yeah, how do you connect to search if you don't know the name of the thing that you're looking for? And that's kind of the same example when you're talking about search. If you don't use the words that they're familiar with or they have no starting point, there's no way to connect to them. User interviews and testing. I would always encourage people, if possible, to carry out user interviews. They are so revealing and so insightful. Here we uncover lived experiences, people's mental models, how they think and process information, and then analytical data that shows user journeys, decision-making, and that completes our understanding of behavior. What this does is it creates a beautiful mix of information, but it allows you to begin to make sense of the analytical data. Why did that person do that? Why did these groups of people doing this thing on the website? You can probably get that from user interviews, but you can also begin to see some of that in the search data. So, keyword, phrase, and research. I spent 5 minutes on Google Trends to learn a little bit more about basically the museums and cultural sector. And I learned a huge amount very, very quickly. First, search shows that people start their journey before reaching the website. They're looking for specific events and exhibitions. So what this suggests is that they have an awareness of the organization and potentially the exhibition, the event, before they hit search. They've learnt about it somewhere else, potentially. Second, they're concerned about ticketing, which actually makes a lot of sense, and they want clarity on booking. And then finally, we actually begin to see some complex journey planning, users searching for multiple museums, nearby restaurants or activities, showing there's an advanced planning behavior in place. That this is not just a visit to a thing, that this is maybe an entire day, which if you think about your own behaviour, if you're going to go somewhere and it's going to be further away from home than normal, maybe, if that's what you're choosing to do, you probably will do that. So this allows us to move to a role that kind of begin to have empathy for our users, and content designers talk a lot about empathy. Empathy is hard. Empathy is difficult. And the reason for this is we're not built as humans to constantly push ourselves into the mindset of another individual. We're us and we like being us, but we need a mechanism to constantly do that, and user research allows us to begin to do that, to push ourselves into that role, understand what it's like to be that individual. And by building empathy, by revealing how others experience the world, we can see differently and act differently. And what I mean by that is when we do that, when we understand that people's understanding is shaped by history, culture, and lived experiences, we can make different choices. And this is particularly important in your organisation, in your organisations and other organisations, where interpreting sensitive historical events is important, along with cultural interactions. And through user research, we can not only discover who engages with our content, but who does and doesn't, and why. So I'm conscious of time. I know we started a little bit later. So defining the user journey. We do this through journey mapping. So this took a little longer than I anticipated. He should pop up in a minute. There we go. The problem is that user journeys rarely follow a straight path. However, we need to represent them as a linear journey in order to basically sense make. The reality is, for most user journeys, they're a little bit like this. They are a tangled ball of string. People navigate services in complex ways. They often will dip in and out. You need to remember that you're not their life, you are part of their lives. So they will maybe come in and out, and they maybe interact over a period of time. So it's not a continuous journey, it's a fragmented journey, it's often a complex journey, but we do need to make sense of it. So by journey mapping, we bring basically order to what appears to be chaos, and I stress appears, and we begin to understand things, we can begin to understand and place in context thoughts, feelings, and actions. And this powerful tool, so you've done this user research, allows us to transform our research into clear patterns of understanding. It allows us to understand structure and uncover interaction with services. This visual framework also allows us to understand, basically create actionable steps. It helps us to create content that supports the people who basically interact with us. Fundamentally, it allows us to create something you will hear from Content Design London again and again and again: useful, usable, and safe. And safe is also important because content can be harmful if it's not crafted in the right way. So how do you map a journey? So here's all the user insights you've gathered. Generally nowadays it isn't done on a board, and it isn't done with post-it notes that fall off. I miss those days. There's nothing like a good set of post-it notes all falling off at the same time on the board. And then you're like, where did this go? So basically, the simple thing to understand about user journey mapping is a beginning, middle, and end. What prompts an action? So that's the beginning, a middle, what people do, and then the end, the outcome. And then we take that user research and we organize it into beginning, middle, and end. There's going to be definitely a starting point with some of the information you gather. There's going to be definitely a middle point and an end point. And what we do is we refine this again and again and again into identifiable steps that we can group together. There's a little bit of an art in that, in the sense you're having to find groups, but it is possible to do, and it's done every day by content designers and service designers and people who use this method. So here's an example of journey map. Now, they come in lots of different forms, and you'll see one in a minute. I quite like this one for this particular exercise because it allows you to understand. Sometimes you'll find visuals, somebody talented who is basically able to draw will do that. I need to actually look at this. So one of the simplest ways to think about user journeys and how to use them, and I'm condensing this process, this normally is a 2-day class, is to think about what they're doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're saying. And from here, you can build a rich picture of what is happening. So for do, basically, it might look something like this. A child learns about Romans at school, and they excitedly share their interest with their parents. The parent searches online for local Roman activities or discovers a museum exhibition. They visit the museum or event website, and they learn more about the exhibition. The parent books the tickets for the weekend, and then the family takes the train, and they have a great day, which is what we hope for everybody. Now, what you probably would find in user research, and I'm not going to go through all of these, is that in an interview, they might say, Juan, who's my son obviously, is looking to do Romans at school. There were lots of different search engine results, and these do come out depending upon the questions that you ask. I found it difficult to navigate the website, don't we all? We found a date eventually that we could go on. The train was really expensive, but we had a great day. Then what you'll tend to find is things that they may have thought. This is quite a difficult area because how do you know what someone's thinking? Generally, they will tend to imply things in user interviews, and they might actually imply things in search engine data as well. You can kind of see it sometimes. It's like been a long day. They might have said I was really tired. They found it really difficult, and they wish they knew more people knew about the opportunity. Sorry, I've got to move this down. Sorry, just so you know, I have dyspraxia, so coordinating this, I'm doing well. I should get an award. I'm simultaneously moving through things. I'm doing well. I don't drive cars. So what you might also find out is how they feel. So they might feel that they might have said they're tired. And sometimes I've had this example where people have said, I just have a really long day, and it's just another thing to do. So you're tired. You can imply that. They might be confused, and they might have even said that. They might have even said they're things like they're relieved when they were able to basically get a place. And then we've got the stuff at the bottom, which is the data. Now, this is the bit talking about how do we join up data and how do we make decisions about data and how do we contextualize data. Well, this is the way you do it. Because basically, analytical data tells you what happened. It doesn't tell you why it happened. It just tells you what happened. Well, this is allowing you to understand both. You might find out that Google, you probably already know this if you work in this particular areas, that Google is your highest referrer. So good news, you validated that. You've got a high average time on per page, which has been confusing you because you just want people to book. Well, now you know that people are finding it hard. You've got a low conversion rate. Well, that might be connected to the fact that there was some dates that weren't available. That's maybe something you can't control, but at least you know it now. And then you might have some secondary data, or you might have heard, depends on the level of project you're working on, that cafe and gift sales are down. Well, whilst you can't prove a direct connection, you do know that there was comments around how expensive it was to travel. And from here, you might end up something looking like this. These things never fit on screen properly at all. They're huge. But basically, it's organized into stages, steps, what people said, pain points, extra information, and user needs. They all come in different forms, so don't think this is a standardized form. There are lots of ways to present this information. Think of each of those rows as a filter, a way of looking at the information and organizing it. And the more that you do that, the richer the information you have and the better the decisions you can make. So you might have identified these pain points and opportunities. So the two I'm going to focus on here are that they found effectively the page difficult to use, and also they were anxious about the cost. Now, what can you do? Well, actually, you've identified a pain point and potentially prioritization. You probably need to fix that page through content design. So this is not about changing the whole experience. This is maybe just about fixing a part of it, and often as content designer, you'll only work on a single part. Now, what could you do about trains? Well, you can't make them be faster, you can't make them be cheaper, but maybe what you could do from a marketing perspective, if you're in that other space, is maybe there's a follow-up email that could be sent about budgeting or planning your day in advance, and some top tips for that family. But what's brilliant about user journey mapping is also you can begin to understand something I call constraints. Because what you understand is the channels they're using, it takes the guesswork out of the content that you need to create. So you probably need to make sure that your search engine summaries and titles are clear so people can click through. The website's where people come to book, so you really don't need to be investing elsewhere to do that. You're probably going to be reliant on emails, and it's an underused tool, actually, email. Email's a really effective engagement tool. I've seen time and time again, even when I was working at universities, where it's like, put this on the website. It's like, this would be so much more effective if we send it to the people it's relevant to. People just don't browse for these things. They don't go, oh, today I'm going to look for this. It doesn't work like that. And then also we can follow up maybe with email at the end. But so you're beginning to kind of understand the edges of the type of content you might need, which helps with planning. It also helps to understand who might need to be involved and who's responsible. But importantly, it also allows you to know the constraints. There have been so many times in my career where I've been asked to put a thing on a website. Content is not like water. It doesn't pour neatly into a glass and just fill it up. It's more like a piece of ice that you kind of like, you're being asked to basically force it into this glass. Something will break, and invariably the content will break. I remember quite clearly being asked to take an entire document and put that on Twitter. That was when it was only 130 characters at the time, and like, what? But what's really important here is that you begin to understand the edges, and this is all about. You remember when I said constantly evolving information and knowing the kind of content that you'll need to create? It allows you to move to a point of certainty. But what's also lovely is because you understand some of the emotional states that the individuals were in at the time, you begin to make some more informed choices about tone of voice. You remember ever having conversations about tone of voice? I think it needs to be happy. I think we need to be more serious here. It feels all like a bit of a guesswork. Well, we can take the guesswork out of it. We know if people are confused, people are overloaded or overwhelmed or tired, they basically don't process information as well. So you're probably going to need a much more direct, straightforward tone. Maybe if they're anxious, you wouldn't obviously say we know you're anxious. That's a no-no in content design world. But you might want to be more reassuring with your tone. Like, here's some ways you can plan in advance to save money. It's a reassuring tone. But it allows you to be more empathetic to your users. It begins to humanize an experience for them. So I've got a little bit of time left. So what do you do next? Well, you develop and deliver. You understand what channels will reach them. You know what formats will work. And then this knowledge can allow you to develop your content. So you're probably thinking, Rich, this feels like a lot. It can be a lot. But I would always say that content design needs to scale to the need you're trying to meet. So if you're developing for a single user need or a page, that could be as simple as just checking the existing research that exists, or if there's a journey map that already exists, looking at existing new keyword data to make sure that people are still using the same words and behaving in the same way, and then maybe just updating it. It doesn't take a lot to do that. It'll take a lot of guesswork out of what you're doing and also remind you why you're there and what you're doing. If you're tackling larger projects, then of course you need to invest more upfront in terms of user research and planning. But fundamentally, I can guarantee you every time we have ever done a project, the one thing we've always discovered is that basically that planning upfront will save you time later on. So don't be overwhelmed, start where you are, and move forward and trust the process. So now you've developed and delivered your content. The final thing I would say is, please, when you're working with content, use the tool to develop the content that you're going to publish it in. Word and Google Docs are a poor substitute for the constraints of a template. It makes sure that the content you design fits and takes out all the work later on. If you can't use the tool immediately, then think about a way in which you can do that. There are plenty of tools to do that will help you, and it'll also improve the production process. So how do content designers do this? Well, we've already talked about how they use their deep understanding of human behavior. And the bit I want to focus on here is just finally pair writing and peer reviewing crits. So often content designers will ask to work with subject experts. And the reason they want to do that is they want to build relationships. And it's really important because subject experts content designers aren't the subject expert, but they can translate, they can make that information more user-focused and centered. Often what a pair writing looks like is two people sit down, the subject expert and the content designer, and then someone will write and someone will ask questions like, I don't understand what you mean, could you tell me? And what's fundamental, when somebody speaks out loud, they say it simpler than they would if they wrote it down, because when we speak, we say what we mean and use natural language rather than when we write. And it's those words where the understanding comes from, and probably your users are actually more familiar using as well. So we have these tools. And then finally, we have user testing. You can do this at the beginning, you can do it at the end, or you can do it both at the beginning and the end in this process. But I would encourage you, if you have the time, to do user testing. This is where we put content in front of a person and we ask them to use it. I can guarantee you, every single time, I have learned something new from my users. But it also crucially can do one other thing. It can show your design working and show the value of your efforts. And coming back to measurement and success, because you've defined the stages of the journey, you understand what needs to be achieved at each stage. The metrics that you are overwhelmed with can now be anchored. You can say, well, at booking, we need to know conversion rates. Email opening for example, when they get the email maybe confirming the booking, that actually it's read. So you begin to anchor these points. So rather than all these data points you can look at, you can begin to identify metrics and demonstrate success. Fundamentally, what you're doing is you're making informed choices, not guesses, and that's what content design is all about. So I just thought it'd be useful to look at a few little examples before the end of kind of content design in action, or where there's been clear thought around the content itself. We often talk about design patterns. These are the ways in which there are almost established conventions for things that people have mental models for, but also how you might organize information in a way that makes more sense. So this is from Tate and, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, the Australian Museum. But if you look, they have the same design pattern. They have a big block of information, a clear title, a summary, and then a clear call to action. Top tip, carousels don't work. They really don't. The engagement, people just literally don't see them. We look at events and exhibitions. What's really lovely about this from the British Museum is that if you look under the filtering, they use words that actually people use. When is it happening? Who's visiting? So that could be a school visit, or could be other people. And what is it about? Then if you look, there's a nice piece of, I call that marketing content, but underneath, there's actually clear booking information. So like, how long does this last? Who's it suitable for? All the things that people kind of need to know before they come, and probably you need to tell them. And then there's a clear booking button. Sometimes images are better than words. Yes, I said it, because I said content design wasn't just about writing. It's about thinking about what's the right format at the right time in the right way. And I'm from Bath, so I've been a few times to the Roman baths. But what's lovely about this is not only is there an image that's clearly showing Minerva's head, but also, actually, if you read the content, it's written in a very plain language way. Why? Well, Bath has lots of international visitors whose first language isn't English, and also has lots of school children visiting. But by doing this, they're opening up the content. Now, what I'm saying is that doesn't mean that you stop writing academically, if that's the thing that you do, but remember the audience and the format and where it's being seen. I've always used the example is if you wouldn't write like a Christmas card in the style of an academic, because that's not the format. This is the same here, but you might want to write a research paper in an academic way. So we're not saying change the style of writing, but remember about the medium and who's consuming it. And one of my favorites, visit us. Yes, I have favorites. Just nothing gets in the way. What tends to happen with these pages is somebody can't find the place, somebody is lost, somebody's just like, And all they want to know is the address, maybe a phone number if they need to find it, because they just basically are completely lost. The opening times, there's a handy hint, when to arrive and when not to. And importantly, accessibility information. Another one, pure information. The best examples of accessibility pages are when the information is straight up front and there's no marketing bump. Because fundamentally, what people want who have access needs, they need to know and get their question answered quickly. Is there disabled parking? What is the mobility and wheelchair access in this building? So can I literally turn up? That's all they want to know. And actually, by doing that, getting it out of the way, by giving them the information, you're actually showing that you care and you understand their needs. And finally, I talked about mental models. Well, importantly, people have really strong established mental models for certain things, like e-commerce, thanks to people like Amazon. We're used to big boxes, small bits of information and a price, and then maybe some filters. And there you go. There's a strong, don't break those mental models because they will confuse people and then they will not achieve their goals. So, to cap things off, sorry, I'm running a bit late, I think. So why use content design in your organization? Well, when you truly understand your audience, you can create experiences that matter and have impact. And the thing is, if you use this systematic approach, you can demonstrate the clear value to your visitors, that you understand their needs, that you've humanized that experience, you've made it connect to them. But also because you've understood that journey and you've understood the decision points and you begin to anchor those metrics against real tangible outcomes, you can demonstrate impact as well. And that can span both physical and digital spaces. Content, sounds like I'm saying content design isn't just for Christmas. Content design isn't just for digital spaces, it is also for physical spaces too. So we move from making guesses to informed decisions. And the brilliant thing about content design is it says it doesn't just stop when you launch it. You can refine it over time because as you develop a systematic approach and measurement, you can then begin to refine that further and further and further so it works better and better each time. So when you deliver something, never think it's an end point, think it's just a start. So, I don't know if I have any time for questions, and if I don't, that's fine. Any questions? By the way, I can't see anybody because of the lights. Oh, hello.
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 This is kind of going back to, you talked about or showed the webpage for, the national collection.
Yeah.
Idea and a call for that. If there was a unified national collection, isn't there a risk of erasing diverse voices, and how might you approach that from a content perspective?
That's really interesting. I think, so I'm just trying to think about another example I can think of. I think there is, but if you do your user research well, you understand different needs, then you should be able to balance those off. I don't promise that content design is the panacea to all problems, but what I've seen again and again and again, where we open up information, we make it accessible, the benefits sometimes outweigh those risks. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, super quick question.
Yeah?
Is the Norman door called after Norman Wisdom?
No. I can't remember the guy's last name. That's Don Norman, that's it. I knew it was like, there was a short bit. So it's named after Don Norman, who has basically kind of played an important role, less so now, in the foundations of kind of UX. I believe that Don wrote the Design of Everyday Things, which I believe has, I don't know if it still has the kettle, which has 2 handles. But yeah, it's called a Norman door because of that. You'll never look at a door again the same. You'll be like, Cool. Anybody else got any other questions I can help with?
Thank you very much. It's really nice talk. I come from Dyson School of Design Engineering, so they teach us this kind of human-centered design, so I can totally relate to that. My question is about when you speak of content design, how is that different from designing contents for exhibition versus designing contents for marketing? I just want to understand the differences.
Oh, that's a big question. I'd say there's no difference. I think what we have with content design and what you have with marketing is we just often, this is what happens in content design and lots of different professions. We have lots of different words that mean the same thing. So marketing will say customers, I will say users. But actually when you get down to the crux of it, we're talking about the same things. We might use different methods, but fundamentally what we want to do from a marketing perspective is you want to engage your audience, you want to support their journey, and you want to achieve an outcome. That's the same as content design. Now, how you might go about that is slightly different. And that's why I don't think there's ever an inherent contradiction between being a content designer working in a marketing space and one working in a purely kind of information-driven space. And as someone who worked in university where you literally have to span, like selling a course, telling somebody about very boring and dry regulations through to, this is how the sports centre works. I can tell you that principle runs across all of those. You can use that, and that's why it's such a great skill to integrate into a standalone team. All can be used by marketers themselves. But what it does do is gives you a really useful framework and way of thinking about it. And I think the difference is that the kind of double diamond approach and that more kind of focus on iterative. It's not that marketers don't iterate, but there's a more wider acceptance that knowledge is emergent, that there's iteration that takes place. And that gives you more freedom to play as a marketer.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think curators should speak more with content designers to improve their delivery of the experience?
Say that again, sorry?
Do you think like content designers as like museum curators should speak more with content designers?
Yes. The best content designers are those who are open to listen to what subject experts have to say. I could have never done my job, and I couldn't do my job today if I didn't listen to subject experts. Like in a university, I wouldn't necessarily know student finance to the nth detail or how to basically book a place in the gym. It could be as well as that. But also actually when you work in an agency space, you're only in a short engagement. You're only there for probably sometimes 6 weeks. You have a week. So you have to listen. It's a really important skill that we have to learn and be open about.
Lovely, thanks. Perhaps leading on from your question about Double Diamond, there's a question here that's come from our online audiences. So if you're online as well, please do submit questions through the Slido channel. The question is, why do you find the Double Diamond a useful tool?
Good question, actually. I think because it anchors you. There are lots of different ways, and you can go online and then there'll be these kind of link bait articles going like, is the double diamond really that relevant? Or I use a triple diamond. And it's like, we're trying to out-diamond each other. I think what I'm trying to say is, as long as you have a structure, a way of moving through problem solving, and you know that process works, use it. The double diamond is one of the easiest methods to use. I'm not one of those people who's become dogmatic about stuff. I'd rather learn and iterate. And like I said, that double diamond, it never really happens because you kind of sometimes end up back at the beginning, or you might having to constantly go around in a circle at certain points. All I say is trust yourself, but have a clear process and method. And if you have that method, then it will get you to the end. And I remember one of the content designers says to me at Content Design London, I just need to trust the process. Sometimes I get a bit nervous, but every time I've done it, I've got to the end and we've got the result we needed. And it's really important as somebody working in this space, you can be pushed in different directions to try and anchor yourself somewhere, or otherwise you end up and you're kind of like being blown in any different direction. But if you can do that process, what it does is two things: anchors you, but it allows you to show your workings out. Because one of the things that happens in projects where people don't begin to trust breaks down, is a lack of transparency. But this process also allows you to show your thinking and help other people understand your thinking who are not close to the project, maybe a sponsor, maybe people who are involved in the project. You've got artifacts to say, look, here's the user research, here's how we made sense of it, this is all the important pain points, this is how we're going to solve the problem. Trust breaks down, or if you want to build trust, when you can show that you're working in the open, you are basically answering the question the organisation needs answering. Ooh. Ooh.
Hi, thanks very much. I've taken so many notes from this. It's been really great. I have a question about is there a risk in using evidence-based content design that you prioritise the users that you currently have because that's what you have the abundance of data for?
Yeah.
And are there any strategies that you suggest for reaching entirely new user bases where you don't necessarily understand a lot of their experience in the beginning?
That is a really good question. I think that's a really difficult question to answer in some respects because you don't have an abundance of data. I think in some respects you've answered it. So having an awareness, an intentionality to broaden your understanding is probably the first step. And simply by having that fact in your head and knowing that you need to do that, that's the first step. I think the more difficult aspect comes when you're trying to engage groups who traditionally don't engage, or groups who would traditionally not consider, who basically get overrepresented in the sense that they are asked a lot of the time. So a good example is ethnic diverse groups, LGBT groups. They often get asked, people become token representatives. My first answer to that is, 1, you need to be aware of that. 2, don't always immediately go to user research for that answer. There might already be existing research available that tells you. Only then, when you don't have that answer, go to those groups and do that in a way that basically is sensitive, and maybe you want to take advice. You might have a diversity, equity, inclusion person in your organisation. If not, you might want to get independent advice. As someone who is LGBTQ and was at universities, I was over-surveyed all the time. What does Rich think about this? What does Rich think of this? What does Rich think of Pride? It's like, it's just a lot. And you're like, there are other people, there are other perspectives, you know. But I agree. First, just being aware. Second, then that research. And thirdly, only then approach those groups. Cool. Cool. Oh, mic coming in the other way. It's like a Mexican wave of mics.
There's something slightly circular about not breaking mental models.
Yeah.
And it quite relates to what's been said there.
Yeah.
Engaging your kind of existing people better. Better than new people. Do you have any tips about how to evaluate when to break or how to break potentially poor existing mental models?
Yeah, we actually have an article on there's a technique we use called rebut, reflect, re-educate. Sometimes you do need to break the mental models, but it's very tricky to do because these things are really ingrained in individuals. You see sometimes, actually, I know this sounds the example I think we use in the article is actually strangely enough Nando's, because it's the easiest way to show how they break a mental model and then retrain you with it. Because everybody knows how McDonald's works. It's a drive-through where you go up and you use the kiosk. But if you've never been to Nando's before, you think, oh, it's a sit-down restaurant. Somebody's going to come and speak to me. The first thing they do is tell you that it's not sit-down. They go, they give you, they put the little cockerel in the thing. They go, your table number, blah. Here's the menu, you need to go up. So they immediately re-educate you. It is really difficult to do online because you don't have that kind of almost human interaction. In terms of examples of that, this is where we struggle because we have not found very good examples of doing that. You kind of can do it in soft ways. You know, when you have to teach somebody a word they wouldn't be familiar with. So in content design, we say things like, if you're using an acronym, spell it out to start with. So you're beginning to retrain them so they know that when you mention that acronym, that's what you mean. That's a little bit of rebut, reflect, re-educate. In terms of user-centered design and kind of more broader principles, that is more difficult. And what I mean by that is, we've all established what a button does and how it works, and we know when it doesn't work how frustrating it can be. I'm just trying to think about, there are a couple of examples around salience. So there is an assumption that we want experiences to be fast, and that's what people want. But actually we know that sometimes we have to slow decision making. So for example, a good way of breaking someone's mental model maybe, and I'm not saying this is correct because I've done user research, is maybe making it, when you have to scroll through something to understand and you need them to take it in, maybe you want to make it longer to do that. That is not an answer because basically it's almost so difficult to do. Did that help? Cheers. Cool, thank you very much. I'll be around for the morning and at lunchtime. If you want to speak to me, and I'm an introvert extrovert, so I'm just going to go out in a minute to have some me time. But if you want to speak to me at lunch, I'll be around. If you want to email, I'm Rich at Content Design London, or you can email hello at Content Design London. I just want to say thank you for the invite again. Thank you to you all, and thank you for being amazing. I know you've got a great day ahead. You've got some great talks. Thank you so much. Thank you.